Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome to Adventures in History. Today's topic is Abraham Lincoln, Part 11, General George B. McClellan to the Rescue. We stopped last time in 1861 after the Battle of Bull Run, Virginia, Manassas Junction, Virginia. The first major battle in the U.S. Civil War and a victory for the Confederacy. And in this crisis, President Lincoln turned to General George B. McClellan to be to rescue the country in this crisis and to take command of the U.S. military. General McClellan made surveillances of Washington from Professor Thaddeus Lowe's hydrogen balloon. President Lincoln would visit General McClellan seeking military news, wanted to talk strategy with him and tell funny stories. McClellan did not enjoy those visits, and he underestimated President Lincoln. Lincoln sized up McClellan, and he noticed that McClellan's pattern was alarm and exaggeration. Now, there was August 18th, 1861, George McClellan wrote a letter to his wife and said, quote, "The president is an idiot. He is nothing more than a well-meaning baboon." Unfortunately, General McClellan, was never able to take advantage of President Lincoln's leadership and insight, and he didn't respect him. That was unfortunate. October 18th, President Lincoln accepted General Winfield Scott's resignation as head of the Army. November 1st, President Lincoln appointed General McClellan as General-in-Chief of the Army, the top military post. The summer of 1861, President Lincoln's major concern was the border states. In other words, the states which had slavery but had not joined the Confederacy, specifically Maryland, Delaware, Kentucky, and Missouri. During the summer, Georgia also seceded and joined the Confederacy. The Delaware legislature had this to say in that summer, quote, "As Delaware was the first state to adopt, so she will be the last to abandon the federal Constitution." So that was a statement of loyalty to the Union. Maryland had a small population but a very strategic location, and it surrounded Washington City on three sides. And there were the railroad and telegraph communications to the north passed through Maryland to Washington City. Maryland was a very divided state into folks who were in favor of the Confederacy and those who were against. The city of Baltimore was a tinderbox, both sides vying for power there. So Maryland was very much a divided state. President Lincoln decided to err on the side of conciliation was the best path with Maryland. He felt it was a very delicate situation. In the fall, Augustus W. Bradford was elected governor of Maryland and a strong Unionist. And this was very good news for the Union, and it ensured that Maryland would stay in the Union. Now, another very important state was Kentucky, and a famous quote by President Lincoln was, quote, "I hope to have God on my side, but I must have Kentucky." Kentucky was considered a keystone. Both President Lincoln and Jefferson Davis had been born in Kentucky. President Lincoln believed that the long Whig tradition and the life of Henry Clay would help to keep Kentucky in the Union. Kentucky bordered Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois to the north, and Tennessee in the south in the Confederacy. Controlling Kentucky would control the Ohio River and part of the Mississippi. Again, the great quote by President Lincoln, "I hope to have God on our side, but I must have Kentucky." Now there was this good possibility that Maryland could join the Confederacy. However, President Lincoln showed patience, wisdom, and toughness by arresting certain people, and he was able to keep Maryland in the Union. Now back to Kentucky, there were a lot of stories in the war of brothers fighting against brother. In other words, in a family, one brother joining the Union Army and another brother joining the Confederates, and then those two brothers being on opposite sides of battles. Same thing with fathers and sons. Tragic. In battles where a father and a son might be on opposite side. Now, these stories were mostly in Kentucky, and Kentucky, well, again, was the most divided state. Tragic. Again, but Kentucky did remain in the Union. In 1861, the policy in Kentucky was neutrality, and President Lincoln believed that respecting Kentucky neutrality was the best strategy to keep the Kentucky in the Union long term. So he did not pressure them to be officially pro-Union. On September 6, General Ulysses S. Grant, Union general, and the U.S. Army occupied Paducah, Kentucky, and this gave the Union control of the mouth of the Tennessee River, which flowed into the Ohio River. Now, although Kentucky was neutral officially, it did seem there was more support for the Union. Now, Missouri was unfamiliar to President Lincoln, a very complicated situation there, really chaotic. And it controlled a middle length of the Mississippi River. If the Confederates controlled that, they could launch attacks into Illinois, Kentucky, and Tennessee. And at the start of the war, the Missouri legislature, there was a convention in Missouri which voted to stay in the Union. In St. Louis, there was an arsenal of 60,000 stand of arms, other military supplies. And really, there was a civil war in Missouri between Union and Confederate sympathizers, a very terrible war which went on, like a civil war within the state. President Lincoln appointed John C. Fremont. He had been the former, he was this explorer, and he was the 1856 Republican candidate for president. He appointed John C. Fremont head of the Department of the West. So this was a military title. And his office was in St. Louis. Confederate forces were active in Missouri. Very chaotic, a lot of fighting going on. John C. Fremont declared martial law in Missouri, and he freed the slaves that belonged to the rebels in Missouri. President Lincoln was alarmed, and he wrote to John C. Fremont to change course. In that letter, President Lincoln said, quote, "This letter is written in a spirit of caution and not of censure." He was concerned that the effects of Fremont's actions. John C. Fremont freed the slaves on August 30th, but President Lincoln nullified the order. Historian William Lee Miller wrote, quote, "The great promise of the Declaration of Independence to all the world, all men are created equal, would not be realized unless its bearer, the United States of America, was preserved. And the United States would not be preserved unless Kentucky was kept in the Union. And Kentucky would not be kept in the Union unless Fremont's order was quashed." In 1861, this was early in the war. The war was not about freeing slaves, and Kentucky was a slave state, Maryland as well, and President Lincoln felt that at this point, he could not offend those states. He needed them in the Union, and he could not. So he countermanded that order, freeing the slaves of Missouri. President Lincoln sent a letter to Fremont with Fremont's wife Jessie, who came to the White House to meet President Lincoln to speak about this topic. And in the letter, President Lincoln said, quote, "This is a war for a great national idea, the Union." Or he said this to Jessie Fremont. "General Fremont should not have dragged the Negro into it." And so they got into an argument. Jessie Fremont was defending her husband and his actions, and President Lincoln didn't appreciate it. And he said, quote, "Mrs. Fremont taxed me so violently with many things that I had to exercise all the awkward tact I have to avoid quarreling with her." After 3 months, President Lincoln terminated Fremont's appointment as his position there. Now, Frederick Douglass, you see the challenges Abraham Lincoln faced. Frederick Douglass, the leader of African Americans, was very angry that President Lincoln did not support Fremont's actions, and he said, quote, "Slavery is the bulwark of rebellion, the common bond that binds all slave-holding rebel hearts together. Cut that bond and the rebellion falls asunder." So you see, his opinion was he felt that this was that should have stood the actions of Fremont freeing the slaves in Missouri. Everyone had different ideas about what to do in this complicated situation. Now, the action of Fremont made him an anti-slavery hero for Republicans, but President Lincoln did rescind that order. And Lincoln said, quote, "Can it be pretended that it is any longer the government of the U.S., any government of Constitution and laws, wherein a general or a president may make permanent rules of property by proclamation?" On October 20th, Union General Charles P. Stone and 2,000 U.S. troops faced 1,600 Confederate troops under General Shanks Evans, a Union attempt to capture Leesburg, Virginia, and this was led to the Battle of Ball's Bluff, which was a Union disaster. 1,700 Union casualties, killed, wounded, or taken prisoner, and only 149 Confederate casualties, so this was a defeat for the Union. And President Lincoln's friend, Edward Baker, died in the battle. He had named one of his sons after this friend. So President Lincoln was very sad over the death of his friend Edward Baker and cried. Meanwhile, President Lincoln was growing impatient with General McClellan, and he wanted the U.S. Army to move south before winter. November 13th, President Lincoln visited General McClellan at his home in Washington City. Now, McClellan was not at home, so he was at a wedding. So Lincoln thought he said he'll just wait for McClellan to return. So he was waiting there in the home. McClellan apparently came back and was informed that President Lincoln was there, and then he went to his room and went to bed. And of course, Lincoln didn't see him. I guess he came in, and just this was a real insult, terrible. November 16th, there was a parade. General McClellan watched 65,000 men parade, and he was criticized for this because there was a war. They needed to fight, not just have men parading. The topic of slavery would not go away. Senator Charles Sumner of Massachusetts was determined to keep talking with President Lincoln regarding slavery, and Sumner wanted the emancipation of the slaves. Historian William Lee Miller wrote, quote, "General George McClellan proved to be a master not of battle but of delay. He would proceed to test Abraham Lincoln's forbearance by the longest series of snubs, slights, slurs, affronts, demands, complaints, missed opportunities, and failures to follow orders by any supposed subordinate during the whole of his presidency." So there was a real challenge. Now, McClellan was popular with the troops, so it was President Lincoln really had this was another very delicate diplomatic situation. Again, he would meet with him. He wrote after a meeting, after President Lincoln met with General McClellan one time, he wrote a letter to his wife, Mary. She must have been off shopping. And he said, quote, "We are about to be photographed. If we can sit still long enough, I feel General McClellan should have no problem." And William Lee Miller commented, quote, "Sitting still was what General McClellan was best at." In December, President Lincoln wrote a letter and quoted a poetry line from Alexander Pope's essay on man, quote, "Honor and shame from no condition rise. Act well your part, there all the honor lies." In other words, do your best, and that's all you can do. That's all we can do in life. The Union Army had grown from 16,000 men in March to 670,000 by December. So that's just incredible. President Lincoln's first annual message in December of 1861, he said, quote, "The struggle of today is not altogether for today. It is for a vast future, also with a reliance on Providence all the more firm and earnest. Let's proceed in the great task which events have devolved upon us." Now, President Lincoln was patient with Congress, who wanted a more aggressive war policy. He had all these different forces on him, different ideas. Secretary of War Simon Cameron was a problematic person. Of course, he had a very large task raising this enormous army and equipping the war, all the things that needed to be done, the supplies and paying the guys and food and clothing and so forth and weapons. Very difficult. In December, President Lincoln said there was no reason to withhold recognition of the two black nations, Haiti and Liberia. Haiti, which had been a French colony of Saint-Domingue, the slaves had revolted. It was an independent country in the Caribbean. And Liberia had been created by the United States and freed American slaves or free black Americans. And previously, it was thought, well, if we recognize these countries, it would offend slaveholders. But of course, offending the South was no longer an issue during the Civil War. Haiti and Liberia. Eventually, that did happen. In October, James Mason of Virginia and John Slidell of Louisiana, two Confederate ambassadors, on their way, sailing to Europe, on their way to Great Britain and France, were captured in Cuba and arrested on board the British ship, the Trent. Now, this was a very complicated and actually dangerous situation. It was believed there could be war with Great Britain because this was, a violation of the rights of Great Britain. And eventually, they were released because of that danger. Now, meanwhile, Mary Lincoln, the First Lady, had been renovating the White House. She bought a 700-piece set of Bohemian cut glass and a $1,100 set of china emblazoned with the national emblem. So some real nice things for the White House. Mary was unpopular in Washington. Some of her brothers were in the Confederate Army, and this is war, so some people suspected her of disloyalty. Secretary of the Treasury Salmon Chase on May 3rd, backing up a little bit, ordered the expansion of the Army. The Army, of course, that needed to happen. Cameron was having a tough time. He was very tense. He lost command of the department. It was very disorganized. President Lincoln offered his colleagues support and the benefit of the doubt. He decided that this Secretary Cameron really wasn't doing a good job, but to save his dignity, he nominated him as ambassador to Russia, and this was appreciated instead of just firing him because he couldn't do the work. And Cameron appreciated that. At the end of 1861, General McClellan was ill with typhoid fever, which really, again, slowed things down in terms of action by the Army. Now back to the Trent Affair. The decision was made to release these Confederates because they were they had been on a British ship. This was really a violation of the rights of Great Britain. Secretary of State Seward said the United States had been in the wrong. And he compared this to what had happened, what the British had been doing before the War of 1812, which was like the cause of that war when they were boarding American ships looking for British deserters. That had violated the rights of the United States. And so it was important to honor the neutral rights on the high seas, the old honored American tradition. So this was, again, the public didn't appreciate it, but again, this is what he was saying. They were saying, yeah, this is what we didn't like, what the British did to us. Now back to Mary, the First Lady. Her closest confidant was a black lady, a seamstress named Elizabeth Keckley, who had been born a slave and lived for 25 years as a slave. They called her Lizzie, and she had a strong influence on Mary. She had experienced the cruelties of slavery from a woman's point of view, and Mary became an abolitionist as a result. Lizzie was a very good friend, very warm and sympathetic good friend to Mary. They were very good friends. White people had helped buy her freedom. So Elizabeth Keckley, very important friend for Mary. New Year's Eve in 1861, a congressional committee met with President Lincoln. They wanted a grand battle to end the war. January 10th, 1862, President Lincoln visited General McClellan at his home, and he was told that McClellan could not see him. So this was, again, this was really bad, and President Lincoln was troubled by this, but, he was a patient man, and he didn't react. President Lincoln enjoyed visiting the office of Montgomery C. Meigs, the quartermaster of the General Army. President Lincoln found strength and hope in visiting Meigs, and he visited often. Meigs was organized, and he became a confidant. Lincoln said to this Meigs, M-E-I-G-S, quote, "General, what shall I do? The people are impatient. Secretary Chase has no money and tells he can raise no more. The general of the army has typhoid fever. The bottom is out of the tub. What shall we do?" The bottom is out of the tub, so I guess an expression, things aren't going well. So he was, as time passed, President Lincoln was becoming desperate. He began thinking of leading the Union Army into battle himself because he was so fed up with General McClellan. January of 1862, a scandal broke regarding the prisoner of war prison in Richmond that had Union soldiers in it. And this was published in the New York Herald newspaper. David Todd, the brother of Mary, was in charge of the Richmond prison where these Union soldiers were held, and the story indicated there was cruelty and abuse of these Union soldiers, and that David Todd, Mary's brother, was vicious and brutal, and he kicked inmates. He had inmates shot for pleasure. So this really hurt. This was a tough scandal because this was Mary's brother. Of course, it wasn't her, but it really was a tough thing to deal with politically. President Lincoln cherished his sons, Willie and Tad. The White House became a zoo with animals for the two boys: ponies, kittens, rabbits, a turkey, a goat, and a dog. February 21st, Nathaniel Gordon, a slave trader, was executed. The slave trade had been illegal for many years, but there was still, of course, there was money to be made, so some people were still bringing slaves from Africa. And Gordon had been arrested in the Congo River in Central Africa. He had 800 African slaves on his ship, the Erie. Now, President Lincoln was a very kind man and lenient, but he did not issue a pardon, and so this Nathaniel Gordon was executed. He was the only slave trader executed under American law. President Lincoln chose Edwin Stanton as his new Secretary of War. Stanton was a gruff lawyer who had humiliated President Lincoln in Cincinnati 6 years earlier in that legal case where they both were on the same legal team, and Stanton really ignored him and treated him poorly. But you can see Lincoln had this patience and forgiveness, and he could see that Stanton could help. So he appointed him. Simon Cameron was the outgoing Secretary of War. In February, there was extensive corruption in the War Department revealed, and naturally Cameron was blamed. However, President Lincoln said that he and his entire cabinet, quote, were at least equally responsible with Cameron for whatever error, wrong, or fault was committed. And Simon Cameron was very grateful and became a devoted friend. So you can see how President Lincoln really treated people well. The new Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, was very energetic and hardworking. And at the War Department, he would come early in the morning and work late at night, put in long hours. He removed some of the Cameron people, and he replaced them with men who had passion, devotion, and drive. Historian Doris Kearns Goodwin wrote, quote, "After nearly a year of disappointment with Simon Cameron, President Lincoln had found in Edwin Stanton the leader the War Department needed." Now, Edwin Stanton was a Democratic Unionist, so he was from the opposite party. And another factor, Abraham Lincoln hoped that Stanton would help bring support from the Democrats who were for the war and for the Union. And this was a turning point in the war because he did a very good job. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton. Stanton met with General McClellan and promised his support. Stanton was a hard worker, often working till 10 o'clock at night. And he had a lot of energy, which was very helpful, very important. And it reminded President Lincoln of a story of a Methodist preacher in the West where the parishioners reportedly put bricks in his pockets to hold him down, that this preacher would get carried away in his preaching. And President Lincoln said, quote, "We may be obliged to serve Stanton the same way, but I guess we'll just let him jump a while first." So that was, he was describing how much energy Stanton had. This really lifted his spirits because he had been depressed. The war had not been going well. President Lincoln admired Edwin Stanton's intellect and energy. Now, General McClellan would give these monotonous military news bulletins, and the most popular phrase that he wrote was, quote, "All quiet on the Potomac." And often this led to people making fun of him for this repeated description, which they thought something needs to happen. There needs to be a movement of troops south to fight the Confederate Army. President Lincoln continued to wait for McClellan to lead troops into battle, and he was discouraged with the Union generals. On January 27th, President Lincoln issued Presidential General Order No. 1. He ordered the Army and Navy to prepare to move south by February 22nd against the insurgent forces. President Lincoln believed that the Confederate Army should be the target and not Richmond, Virginia. Now, this was, in classic warfare. It's like if you capture the enemy's capital, it's like you win the war. But that doesn't always happen. In the American Revolution, the British had taken the American capital, Philadelphia, but that didn't lead to the surrender of the American army. June 19th, the Union Army had a victory led by General George H. Thomas at Mill Springs, Kentucky. So that was good. President Lincoln was monitoring the movements of General Ulysses S. Grant. On February 4th, Grant attacked Fort Henry, the Confederates at Fort Henry, Tennessee, and achieved a victory. Grant never asked for reinforcements, which was nice for President Lincoln. And then only 3 days later, February 17th, 1862, General Grant and the Union Army had another victory at Fort Donelson, Tennessee. And there was the famous quote when they were negotiating the end of that fighting. Grant said, quote, "No terms except complete and unconditional surrender can be accepted." There were 13,000 Confederate prisoners. So this was a major Union victory. And Edwin Stanton sent a telegram to General Ulysses S. Grant, quote, "3 cheers for General Grant." Ronald C. White, Jr., historian, wrote, quote, "All around Washington, church bells rang and cannons fired." The clerk and Stanton, their cheers, quote, "shook the old walls and broke the spider webs and set the rats scampering." So Ulysses S. Grant became an instant hero, and he got the nickname Unconditional Surrender Grant. There was a story that Grant was enjoyed smoking cigars and was smoking one at Fort Donelson. The public started sending General Grant, hundreds of boxes of cigars. And President Lincoln promoted Grant to a major general. He was second in command in the West to General Halleck. Now, President Lincoln's sons, Willie and Tad, had a game, and they would count how many sunny days there were. So, as the war was going on, President Lincoln had these 2 boys there. He was still a father, and they're home. They were growing up in the White House. Now, these Union victories in Tennessee were really a big deal, capturing Fort Henry on the Tennessee River and Fort Donelson on the Cumberland River. The Fort Donelson commander was Simon Buckner, and he was the Confederate who proposed a ceasefire. And again, back to this story. February 16th, General Ulysses S. Grant said, quote, "No terms except unconditional and immediate surrender can be accepted." Grant's victory at Fort Donelson was the first substantial Union victory in the war, 15,000 rebel prisoners. So this was a big deal. There were reports that Grant had taken to the field with one spare shirt, a hairbrush, and a toothbrush. In other words, very little. On the other hand, the reports were that General George McClellan had six 4-horse wagons bringing his clothes to the front. So there was this contrast between the Western hardihood and the Eastern luxury. The simplicity and success of Ulysses S. Grant versus this man of sort of indolence and luxury, General George B. McClellan. Well, that concludes today's presentation. I hope you have a good history book to read or find one. There's so many out there. You might consider checking out our website, Adventures in History with Peter J. Ray at peterjray.com. So far, we've made 726 history videos in 7 areas: world history, American history, book reviews, poetic tours, Cleveland baseball, family history, and autobiography. There's a donate feature. You might consider making a donation to support our work. If you live in Metro Manila, Philippines, and are looking for a high school, you might consider Restless Educational Center. Restless is located on Allenby Street, not far from the corner of P. Guevara and Wilson Street, in Barangay Maytuna, San Juan, Metro Manila, Philippines. At Restless, we specialize in helping young people who have a difficulty in the larger traditional high schools. And we're more than a school. We are a warm, supportive community, and we strive to be creative and innovative so the students enjoy learning and enjoy going to school. And the website is restless.education, RESALEST. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. God bless you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.